Great. Thank you so much. All right. So as I mentioned, my name is Jessica Sprick. I am an educational consultant, co-owner and director of development for Safe and Civil Schools. I have had the honor and the privilege of getting to take the lead on our most recent revision of Champs and Discipline in the Secondary Classroom, which we released in 2021. And following in my father's footsteps, who was our original founder of Safe and Civil Schools and the original author of the Champs and DSC content. Really looking forward to today's 1 hour Fast and Furious session. And I wanted to kick us off by sharing a little reflection that I had. I think it was a little over a year ago when I was observing a kindergarten classroom in the springtime. And I always feel a bit of the same apprehension when I'm walking into any kinder classroom that I do when I'm walking into like a high school chemistry class, where I'm kind of like, if management is not good in this environment, it is, borderline dangerous in what we're seeing within the classroom. And so I do always have a little bit of that, wonderful thanks to our kinder teachers, but they have to have super solid management in everything that they do, because they're teaching our littles who are learning how to be human beings who are functioning in society. And I went into this kindergarten classroom and was with a couple of colleagues and had heard that this was just a, really phenomenal kinder teacher. And so we were just going in to see kind of what skills she was bringing to her classroom. And it was such a pleasure and a joy to watch her in her interactions with her students, and the great academic work and productivity that was happening, but also just the joy that was happening in that classroom. And we ended up staying there a lot longer than we were anticipating. We were going to do like a 10-minute site visit, and I think it ended up being about 45 because we all just wanted to be there. That's what effective classroom management does, is it makes it a climate and a place where you really want to be. And it got to the end of the day. It was maybe 5 or 7 minutes before the end of, when they were going to start going out towards the buses and taking kids out of school. And she said, "All right, everybody, it's time." And she pressed play on her computer and some music popped on. And she just started dancing around the classroom. And I was watching like, okay, what's going to be happening now? Is it a little dance party or something? And no, it was absolutely miraculous. This group of 20, I want to say it was like 25 kinder kids, bless her. They all stood up, started scattering to different areas of the classroom, completely coordinated. It was obvious they knew exactly where to go. One little group went and grabbed some like brooms and dustpans from a closet. Another group went over and started straightening and turning over chairs. Another group there was one kid who went and grabbed a vacuum and started cleaning the rug. And she just the entire time was dancing around the room. "Hey guys, great job, keep it up." She's having those positive interactions with her kids. And all of us, the consultants from Safe and Civil Schools, we were just flabbergasted. It was like, this is miraculous. So we talked to her afterwards, this wonderful teacher named Sadie, and we said, "How did you do that?" And she goes, "Oh, it's so easy." And we were like, no. It's easy now. It looks easy now. How did you do that in August? Because what we really wanted to find out from her is how did she establish this wonderful independent routine that her students knew, that they had practiced, that really allowed her just to be sort of a participant in the room. This is what effective classroom management is. And part of what we realized is that a lot of times we don't see those startup routines, especially when we think about, our pre-service teachers when they're going in to do student teaching. Many of them don't see those first few weeks and the really important work that happens to establish an effective environment. So give me just a second here. I want to take a look. Excellent. We have 6% of our folks who are first-year teachers. Welcome. We are so glad to have you in the profession. I've got 43% of you who are returning teachers, 18% administrators, and 33% other counselor, behavior specialist, coach, instructional assistants. Even saw that we have a substitute teacher. So super glad that you're all here today. That just helps me kind of have a sense of where we're going with this work. About 50-50 split of whether you have been in a CHAMPS professional development with Safe and Civil Schools or not, and pretty close to a split of whether you've got the most recent edition of CHAMPS. So again, just helps me kind of have a frame of reference for some of what I'm going to do with referencing materials and things like that. All right, so let's move forward. Okay, today's webinar, here's our goals. We're going to spend a little bit of time at the start of our hour identifying critical elements that are things that we would hope that all teachers have clarified within their management plan. And most of these things, even if you are a first-year teacher, are things that you've had some experience with, that you've got ideas about how you're going to do things like beginning and ending routines. You've got ideas about how you're planning to run activities and transitions. But it's identifying those elements that we want to put down on paper before the school year even starts, so that if we encounter challenges at any point during the year, it gives us something to go back to and to reflect on. These were the decisions that I had said before I knew my students I was going to put in place. And now what are the things that I might make some tweaks and changes to help if there's aspects of problematic behavior or concerns with motivation. Throughout our hour, I'll be giving you some examples of strategies to improve the behavioral success of students. Obviously, this is not a champs or discipline in the secondary classroom training, so it's just going to be little nuggets of things that might provide some thoughts for folks. If you're wanting to go deeper, certainly we can point you to other resources and then subsequent trainings that are going to be available for folks. We will be looking at some strategies for identifying ways to have a successful launch of your plan. So there's sort of the pre-planning elements, and then there's the now kids are in the classroom. How are we going to launch this on day 1 of school? And then looking at days 2 through 20. I'll also be referencing, for those of you who do have the Champs and Discipline in the Secondary Classroom book, a couple of the reproducible resources that you can be using to do some of this work. So a couple of logistics notes. We will be finishing in the hour. So my goal is to be wrapped up with direct content by 5 o'clock my time. I'm on the Pacific Northwest time zone. I will plan to stay for questions at the end. So we've got probably a pretty jam-packed hour, but if you have additional questions, you're welcome to stay on. We'll stop the recording. We can have a conversation as long as anybody would like to. And then I'll also provide my email at the end of the session so that you can get in touch with me if you'd like for additional questions. Engagement largely is going to be using the chat box for today, just because this is a webinar and we're keeping things moving. I will be giving you some prompts for you to write or to take notes, but just a little note, I will not be emailing out the full PowerPoint slide deck per company policy. We're really not allowed to do that, and it's part of just keeping our intellectual property. But I did create a little 2-page handout that summarizes some of the critical content we're going to be going into and actually goes a little bit deeper in some of the things we won't have time for. So that is going to be, I think we emailed it out to everyone sometime in the last hour and a half or so. I was a little behind the times on getting that to our office to get to you all. Nick also just dropped that in the chat box. So if you click on that, you are welcome to grab those. I did include both a PDF version and a Word document. And I'd like to ask, just with the Word document, if there's things that you need to modify, no problem. But please keep the copyright agreement with that, just so that, again, we're kind of keeping to the intellectual property. Sharing the recording, we will have a recording of this available. It will go on our website, and I believe it'll also get emailed out. And please share this widely. If this is useful to you, we want these webinars. They're free. They're a way to provide some exposure for the work that we do at Safe and Civil Schools, but also hopefully get you some real-time ideas and things that will create some positive action within your school. So do please feel free to share that if it's beneficial. All right, so I'm getting to our first activity. I want to start by just sharing a little story that kind of gets us to some of our thinking here. So I don't know if any of you have ever heard of Florence Chadwick. She was a world-renowned long-distance open water swimmer. And I'm just in awe of anybody who is willing to brave the oceans and try and swim in them, much less going multiple distance miles. Florence Chadwick was the first woman to successfully swim across the English Channel in both directions. She set tons of different time records for the swimming that she did. And one of the stories that comes from the 1950s was she made an attempt to swim between Catalina Island and the California coast, which is actually 26 miles. If any of you have ever been to the Pacific coast, you know that we frequently have times where there's lots of fog that rolls in, the water gets real choppy. And this was what she encountered on her first attempt crossing that channel. On the day of the event, the waves rolled in, the fog rolled in, and she didn't really have a sense of where she was or where she was going. She actually lost sight of the safety boats at a couple of different times. And she ended up quitting, I think it was about 15 hours into her swim. And what was absolutely heartbreaking is she found out after she got into the safety boat that she was less than a mile from the shore. And what she said is, I think if I could have seen the shore, I would have been able to complete it. But I just had no sense of where I was going, how far I had left. And so not having that vision really impacted her ability to kind of go the distance. What ended up happening, she did actually do it 2 months later, and I think it was on a similar kind of choppy, foggy day. But what she said is she kept a mental image of the shoreline. She actually had seen it, visualized it, and was able to keep that in mind. So even when the going got tough, she was able to keep her eye on, this is where I'm going. So with that in mind, we are going to try and visualize what is the shoreline for us during our classroom this year. If you are an administrator working with teachers, if this is an exercise that might be helpful for your teachers to think about, please feel free to take this along. But what is our shore? Okay, so I'm going to give you some prompts here, and I'm going to ask that for about 90 seconds, you can free write. You can type this into the chat if you'd like, or just handwrite or type yourself for your own notes. So what is your vision for success? If you are a classroom teacher in the classroom or classrooms that you're going to be teaching this year, if you are an administrator or someone who supports teachers, you can be thinking about a specific setting that you'd like to be brainstorming, or just kind of in general. What do you want for the climate and the culture of the classroom? How do you want it to feel when you walk in, when students walk in, when families are getting exposed to the work that you're doing? What does the class look and sound like during different activities and transitions? So I know some teachers really like a lot of noise and hustle and bustle. Others would like it much quieter, calm, orderly. There's no right or wrong answer here. It's really just thinking about, what is that vision and how are we going to help whatever group of students we work with to meet that. Jill, I'm right there with you, calm and comfortable. I always want to be, I remember my mom when I was in middle school and high school saying, you want to get free of drama. And I want my classroom to be free of drama. You want to think about the interactions and relationships. What do you want to see between adults to adults, students to students, students to adults, adults to students? What are some of the behavioral and social emotional skills that you want students to learn and display? And some of this could be age-based. So I know I was a middle school teacher for students with behavioral disorders. And one of the things that I wanted to make sure of for behavioral and social emotional skills was that my students learned to persevere, that they learned to work hard and always try their best, but also that they could ask for help. So some of that being able to be vulnerable. And last little prompt here, what are values, habits, mindsets that you would love to help your students grow with? So I'm going to give you just about 30 more seconds. I'm going to kind of peruse through what's in the chat box here. All right, excellent. So I'm seeing a lot of sort of the feel of the classroom. I'm seeing a lot of what we're hoping to help students learn how to develop that work ethic, or the way that they interact with other folks in the building. A lot of these are kind of more aspirational. They're not about the day-to-day actions. They're like the bigger picture things that we want across time. But I do also see, like Laura, I really appreciate that you said routine is structured. So we've got that predictability for students. That also relates to those of you who said calm and comfortable. When we have routine and predictability, that's part of what creates calm and comfort. And yes, we want to be having really fun and engaging things, but that's more likely to happen when we've created a really safe and positive environment. Now, I'm going to share with you just one thing that we oftentimes use to guide the work that we do at Safe and Civil Schools related to classroom management is this statement here. One of the primary goals of classroom management is to help us develop a classroom of students that is respectful, responsible, motivated, and highly engaged in the meaningful tasks that hopefully we're providing with academically and beyond. And so these kind of groundwork pieces and that idea that no matter who your students are when they walk through your door, we know that there are tools and strategies that any teacher can put in place to help develop classes of students that are respectful, responsible, motivated, and highly engaged. So it doesn't matter what experiences they've had in the past. It doesn't matter what their family lives are or things that are happening outside of school. We know that we have a toolkit that we can manipulate to try and help any group of students accomplish this. Now, some groups are going to be tougher than others, right? So that gets me to our second question, is thinking about behaviors of concern that you might like to eliminate. So the flip side of this, we've got our vision for where we want to go. Let's think about what are some of the roadblocks that make that more difficult. So when the water gets choppy, when the fog rolls in, go ahead and list out for yourself. And again, you can put this into the chat box or you can just do this on your own. I'm going to give you about 45 to 60 seconds for this one. List what are some of the common misbehaviors that if you could do a really great job with management this year, they would be less of a problem or you've completely eliminated the concern. So I've listed some possibilities up here on the screen, different things, really common ones, disruption, refusing to follow directions, etc. There's also some that are just like passive work avoidance, the kid who comes to class but doesn't really do anything. You've also got the kid who comes to class but kind of just does the bare minimum to skate by and not be noticed. So go ahead and list those out for yourself. These are going to be things that kind of help guide thinking about changes to your management plan through this hour, but then also beyond, okay? And thank you for those of you who were responding to the question about the screen. It sounds like that was more individual concern. And I think it was Laura. Laura, if you need to log out and come back in, sometimes that helps fix issues like that. And if not, we can try and get you some of the slide images later. Okay, so anything that you just listed in the chat box or anything that you wrote down for yourself, this is really the problem solving that we encourage teachers to do at least, a couple of times a year is like, what are those behaviors of concern that are driving you nuts, that are making it difficult for you to do your job, that are potentially hindering your students' success either in your classroom or long-term, that you'd really like to make some tweaks and adjustments to try and help support that those behaviors aren't as much of a problem in the future. So with that, this gets us to the idea of a behavioral curriculum. All teachers have curricula for whatever it is that they teach. If you're a science teacher, you've got some sort of science curriculum or you've created your units of instruction. If you are a math or a reading teacher, you've got your lesson plans for each day and you've got that vision for what are we hoping to teach kids in the long term and then kind of backwards mapping what needs to happen at each stage across the course of the year to get us there. So we're going to try and develop the exact same thing for behavior. To reach our vision for behavior, we're going to plan out a behavioral curriculum. And this is basically your classroom management plan. As you are making your plan, you're thinking about those behaviors of concern. What are those things that I need to build into the structure and the design of my plan? This is kind of like, good teachers with academics, they know what are likely missteps that students may be making, and they pre-correct for that in the design of their curriculum and instruction. And so we want to encourage our teachers to do the exact same thing. Your classroom management plan is basically a place where you're summarizing the most important information, policies, routines, procedures that you use in your classroom, not just to stop misbehavior. And I think that's a really important thing that we have to remember about classroom management. It's not just about eliminating misbehavior. It's about increasing motivation. It's about making our classrooms places where kids, families, staff all want to be on a daily basis and sort of those climate aspects. And it's also about motivation. So I saw that some of you were commenting, the sort of the bare minimum, the apathy is a real concern. We want to make sure that we're building that into our thinking about our management plan. So if you do not have CHAMPS or discipline in the secondary classroom, our version of the classroom management plan, it is actually a document that we give to folks as part of our book resources and then also any training that we do, is a fillable form that people can, print it and write on it. You can type into it, but it covers these 11 big topics. Now, there's other things that you can bring in, but these are the sort of hallmark ones that we include on our management plan. If you do have CHAMPS or DSC, discipline in the secondary classroom, which is basically the high school version of CHAMPS, our reproducibles are all arranged by chapter, and you can download those. There's a code on the first page of the book where it's got the copyright page. There's download codes, and the classroom management plan is reproducible 1.1. So administrators, coaches, et cetera, if you have done CHAMPS training, a lot of the schools that we work with will actually require yearly that teachers look at their management plan, they make tweaks and changes, and they actually submit that to administrators at the start of the school year. And part of the reason for that is that then if there are any problems, administrator, coach, et cetera, you can be sitting down with the teacher with what their plan was at the beginning of the year and kind of looking at, what's working well, what needs to be changed, what maybe did you indicate you were going to be doing at the start of the school year, but as things moved forward, they started slipping, or you made some changes to it. Again, this is not a CHAMPS training, so I'm just going to mention a couple of these here. Guidelines for success are really sort of the attributes that you want to create for your students. It's more about that culture building piece. So in traditional PBIS schools, this sounds like be safe, be respectful, be responsible. We always encourage schools and then also classroom teachers to think about what are the ones that are most important for you, where if you were going to run into a student 10 years, 20 years from now, they would say, man, Miss Sprick, you really taught me how to push through tough times and to work collaboratively, right? One of the guidelines that I had for my students, because I worked with kids who had experienced a lot of failure in the school system, I actually had two that kind of went together. The first one was always try. It was like the one thing that I'm going to ask you is that you make an effort with anything that we're trying to do. My job is to try and support you and to make sure that you don't feel a sense of failure, that you feel like you're falling in whatever we're asking you to do. So always try and do your best. Those were two of my guidelines for success in my classroom. And it was really about helping remind me what are the words, the actions, the daily things that I'm going to preach, that I'm going to reinforce to try and create a culture that is helping build these attributes for my kids. On the flip side, we had classroom rules. And I know some locations have really tried to move away from rules because they don't really want that sort of rules punishment mindset. There is research that shows us that when students really struggle with behavior, having very clear operational classroom rules can help us with consistency. It can help us as teachers make sure that we're using positive and corrective feedback effectively. And so this is one question for you, is the behaviors that you wrote down of concern, would any of them lend to having a classroom rule? Usually classrooms that use them have somewhere between like 5 or 6 that they include. So if you have trouble with students with non-compliance and with continually arguing, you might consider like a follow directions quickly or follow directions without arguing rule. In my classroom, one of the biggest behaviors of concern that prevented my students from being able to go in mainstream was they had just foul potty mouth language all the time. And so one of my classroom rules was use school and work appropriate language and topics. So we used those rules as a vehicle for the lessons that we were going to teach within our behavioral curriculum. We used them frequently for positive feedback. So it was like I might have a time period where I'd say, hey, everybody in the class, thank you so much. We have gone the last 20 minutes without me having to remind everybody about Rule 2 to use school and work appropriate language. So you guys are really learning how to sort of keep your doors open by making sure you've got that off switch on some of those words. So that's guidelines for success and rules. You've got sort of the more aspirational pieces, and then you've got the operational. Attention signal. This is one of the critical components that if you do not have an effective attention signal that can gain all of your students' attention within no more than 3 to 5 seconds, What tends to start happening is there's a little bit of a loss of instructional control. You lose a lot of instructional time. And it really is just a way of making sure that you can do rapid transitions between different types of activities and get students the information that they need. Beginning and ending routines, the start and the end of any student's experience with us. If you're in a middle school or high school, those need to be real tight because we cannot afford to lose 5 to 10 minutes at the front or the back end of any of our time with our students. There's just not enough instructional time. Elementary and elementary teachers, those folks who are going to be seeing kids all day long, it's really about creating that culture of like, what is the start and the end of our day set as the tone. So you're seeing some other things that are listed on here as critical components, procedures for family contact, managing student assignments, et cetera. One of the real important things is you think about your management plan, and for many teachers doing a little bit of time investing in thinking about whether tweaks or changes are needed is that fifth bullet point, expectations for activities and transitions. And this is really just thinking about what were the times of day or the activity structures where you lost too much instructional time. So if students really struggled with independent seat work, do I need to make adjustments to, how loose I am with some of those expectations? Do I need to make changes to how students are seated during those activities? Do I need to make changes to the length of time? So for example, in my classroom at the start of the year, I worked with students who had a lot of behavioral struggles. They could not pay attention to independent work for long periods of time. Whereas I could go into a general education classroom at the middle school and some teachers could have a 15 or a 20-minute independent activity. Most of mine were more like maybe 2 minutes max at the start of the school year. And then over time, we built that stamina. So you're going to have teachers work to clarify what are all of those little nuanced decisions. And again, putting those down in writing at the start of the school year so that changes can be made across time. Now, one of the critical considerations within any management plan is the level of support that students will need. And teachers may not know their group of students yet, or they only know individuals, but they don't know the mix up of the whole group. So I'm just going to loosely describe 3 levels, and then we'll talk about how to adjust based on the start of the school year. So level of support has implications for every decision that you make in your management plan. If we went back to that previous slide or the top page of your handout, if you have a low support management plan, it means that students can basically be responsible on their own. Even if the teacher is not in the room, they're still mostly doing the right thing. They've got their own goals. They've got executive function skills. They've got, interpersonal skills to be able to stay focused or to be able to work together. So highly responsible, highly engaged. I think about, the level of support that I put in place, even when I'm working with adults, is oftentimes low support. It's kind of like, hopefully you all are excited to be here. I don't need to do a lot to really orchestrate and organize the environment to help you be successful. But sometimes, even with adults, I need to put in a medium support plan, which is where we've got students who can handle some independence, but they need some more parameters to be successful. So for example, if I know that I'm working with a group of adults who is not super excited that we're doing professional development, and especially if it's like the gear up week before school starts and we're doing a CHAMPS training the day before students are going to be walking in the door, I'm going to increase my structure and support of the decisions that I make with management to try and ensure that people stay more focused, to try and make sure that we've got more motivation happening because they may be thinking about other things. So a lot of our classrooms in our schools, K through 12, might be fitting, well, maybe not K. It's like 2nd grade through 12th grade are going to be in more of the medium category where we're going to give some structure, some support. We're going to do a lot to keep things positive and make sure that our corrections are effective. But it doesn't have to be quite as tight as those classrooms where we've got even 2 students in a classroom who are significantly emotionally needy, have high risk factors. We know that there's kids who have experienced lots of trauma or lots of students who have disabilities. If students are behind academically, and we've got quite a few students in the class that fit in that category, oftentimes there's more frustration and there's more need for behavioral support in those types of classrooms. So if you're thinking about your classes, you're going to kind of loosely categorize them where they might fit. What I oftentimes say is that like we really have to be thinking about that level of orchestration and care from adults. And part of the reason for that is like we know what happens when there's the absence of a supervising adult. It can kind of turn into a Lord of the Flies situation. And so some of our kids need us to provide a lot of that orchestrated care so that they can learn how to navigate the school setting and navigate in the broader world. So let me just give you an example of low, medium, and high support when we think about teacher-directed activities. Our recommendation is always going to be whatever level of support you think your students might need, start at least one level higher. So for example, with teacher-directed activities, when I am working with a low support group, so maybe high school AP classes, students are highly motivated, they've got lots of good academic skills. When I'm working with groups of adult learners, a lot of the times I have low support. And so what that looks like is I let people know at the beginning of the day, get up and move around if you need to. If you need to get a drink, if you need to use the restroom, you don't need to ask my permission. If it were in a school setting, of course, I would follow whatever the expectations were for use of passes or different things like that. And I might say like no more than one person out of the classroom at a time. In terms of conversation, like very loose, I might even say something like, you can have a quiet on-topic side conversation in a very quiet voice just between you and the other person, as long as it's on topic and it's no longer than 30 seconds, right? So you can see here, this is quite loose, right? But even if you know that typically your classes have been low support, so let's use again the example of AP high school classes, we're always going to recommend start the year in the more medium level of support, because that's going to make sure that if you do have a group that just happens to be a little bit more challenging, you're not then having to undo bad habits and you're not having to like revoke privileges. It feels way better if you start with higher structure, higher support, and then you back it off if you've got a super responsible group of students than to take it away once things have gone poorly. So medium, teacher-directed instruction. There's a whole bunch of different ways that you can have medium levels of support, but it might be something like zero talking when one person is talking to the group. So if I'm talking as the teacher, if one of your classmates is speaking to the whole group, we're going to have a zero voice level. And as I'm teaching students this, I'm going to use active participation. So I'm going to be like, everybody, what voice level? And then they're going to say zero voice level, right? So when one person is talking, nobody else is talking. I might say something like, you can get up and move around the room to sharpen your pencil, to get needed materials, to get a drink, but only if nobody else in the room is moving. So I would prefer not to have 10 people moving around the classroom at once when we're doing instruction. It's just too visually distracting. But if you need something, you can get it. I might also teach a procedure. One procedure that I learned from the wonderful Dr. Anita Archer is she taught me having students during teacher-directed instruction use a public question signal. So if you have a question and you need help and it relates to the content, you can raise your hand with an open hand. But if it's a private question, I need to use the restroom, I need to get a drink of water, something that does not relate to the content of what we're doing, you're going to raise your hand like this, right? So still allows for those types of questions can happen, movement can happen, but it's a little bit more tightly structured. Now, highest structure would be something like zero voice level during teacher-directed activities, no movement without permission, and we might clarify specific times that certain things can happen. So like, I know in a lot of schools, they'll say no students can leave the classroom for the first 5 or 10 minutes of class, just so that then we don't have students who are out getting materials, who are also getting a drink, who are out with the kids who are tardy. Consider procedures for things like sharpening a pencil. Is there a way that you could have a quick and easy procedure that would not require that the student gets up out of their seat? For getting materials, is there a way that you could have a materials manager at your table, at each table, that is going to go get the materials, who's a very highly responsible student? Right? So with higher levels of support, it just means that the teacher is going to have to do a lot more critical thinking about what are the procedures and the things that are most likely to set students up for success. So where do students have the most difficulty? How do I create workarounds for that? So pencil sharpener is a real good example of that. In my classroom, my students could not really handle getting up and using the pencil sharpener because they would wander around the classroom. They would intentionally break their pencil to get out of their seat. So we had to think about really high support questions, even around something as mundane as the pencil sharpener. It was things like the student would hold up their broken pencil and we would just swap it out for them, or get a whole bunch of little golf pencils and the student can use that for a period of time, right? So as you're thinking about the aspects of clarifying your management plan, if things are working well, by all means, keep them the same. Right? So unless you have reason to think that they're not going to continue working for the student or the group of students, you're just going to list out what worked well for you in the past. But anything that was difficult last year or that you felt like it took too long for us to get where we needed to go, you're really spending this time, I'm guessing most of you have not started with students yet. There might be a few of you who have, but really thinking about what adjustments could I make that would pre-correct so that that doesn't become a problem for the rest of this year. So as you're doing this, if you have champs in discipline in the secondary classroom, I want to cue you into a really useful resource. You could have reproducible 1.1, which is the blank form that you're filling out for all of those different decisions, guidelines for success, posted rules, attention signal. But if you have the current edition of champs or discipline in the secondary classroom, they're the ones that look like this. So previous edition of champs was orange. Previous edition of DSC was, I think, black with green. So these are the white and green versions. This version has a bulleted classroom management plan that basically outlines essential goals and decisions that you can make for each of these different aspects. So for example, you can see here on the screen, item 1 on the classroom management plan, guidelines for success. It says list 3 to 5 positive expectations, what students should do to be successful in school and in life. They don't need to be specific behaviors. They refer to habits, traits, or attitudes that teach students how to be successful. Refer to them when teaching, encouraging, and correcting. So this bulleted reproducible, and again, my apologies to those of you that don't have the resource. There's just a lot of copyrighted material here, so I can't give out the whole thing. But if you do have that CHAMPS or DSC resource, I kind of view this bulleted reproducible 1.2, it's kind of like your classroom management plan cliff notes. It gives you just like the most essential factors that you want to include, which can also help you if you're struggling with a particular area and like you look at the recommendations here and say, I need more information, then you can go into that book content. So let me give you an example of this. Moving on to this next one. In the bulleted classroom management plan, one of the things that it deals with is procedures for your beginning and ending routines. And for the ending routines, procedures for ending the class or period, it says describe how you're going to wrap up the end of the day or the class, and it gives a couple of goals. Students are going to organize their materials and complete any necessary cleanup tasks, what that kinder teacher did so masterfully. Goal 2, procedures provide you with enough time to give students positive and corrective feedback, end the class on a relaxed note, and allow time to organize for those things. Now, dismissal. Describe your routine for dismissing the class. The goal is the students will leave the classroom when you dismiss them, not the bell. So to give you a sort of non-example of this, I was observing in a middle school math teacher's class, and she was a really master teacher. I had seen her teach classes in previous years. And incredible instructional content. She was really, really good with her students at like motivational techniques. But she had always taught sort of regular to advanced math classes. So she was oftentimes working more with like the 8th grade students. She was oftentimes working with the kids who were already pretty motivated and had a pretty good behavioral skill set on their own. And one particular year, she was really struggling, and it kind of came to our attention through a number of different referrals. And then we were seeing kids kind of spilling out of her classroom at the end of the class period, and it was a little bit chaotic. And what I realized is that this wonderful master teacher who had a phenomenal skill set with a certain subset of students in the school was now struggling because she was teaching a remedial math class. It was 7th period out of 7 in the day. And it was one of our largest classes. So I think it had about 35 middle school students in it. And when we looked at the students in the class, she had about 6 of our highest flyer kids in terms of their number of referrals, all in one class. And so we initiated some support for her, tried to think about how can we help her problem solve and think about ways to do things differently. And one of the things that we realized is she was using the same procedures for dismissal that she was with her advanced and earlier in the day classes, which was pretty much along the lines of we're going to do about 15 minutes of independent work at the end of the day, and you can get any homework done if you finish early. But if you finish that independent work, it's kind of just free time. You can get ready to pack up your stuff. You can be near the door. She was interacting positively with a lot of the kids. And again, when you've got a very highly motivated group of students who are really responsible, that can work. Right? It may not be totally recommended in terms of just good instructional practice, but she was seeing her students were getting the work done. It was a disaster with her 7th period class because these students were kids who didn't like the academic work, who struggled, who did not have good focus and engagement. And so what started happening is, you'd have kids work for about 2 minutes, then a couple of students would start to cluster at the door. Then you've got 13 minutes of now gradually more and more students crammed at the door. Eventually somebody would open the door. We actually found out later that students were having a competition to see how far they could get away from the classroom before they would get yelled at and get called back in. So it was a matter of thinking about what are the goals for the end of the period. Right. And so taking these goals, we want this to be an organized time period. We want to make sure that we're able to do any wrap up business. Part of her goal was I want students to be working on independent work and that way I can be giving them some help and some instruction. So it was a matter of tightening down those expectations. Students are going to stay seated right up until the bell rings. Even when the bell rings, the teacher is going to be dismissing them, not the bell. So she had procedures for that. She actually started doing where her dismissal was basically she would tap students' desk as she was going around. And if they were being really responsible and finished early, she had her first wave of students that got to exit the class quickly. So it's helping her accomplish those aims. Another thing that you can think about is independent work at the end of any class period can be real difficult for students. And so finishing up with about 5 minutes of teacher-directed instruction. So what is going to be happening on the next day? Let's do a little review of the things that we were working on. Just helps everything kind of finish on that calm, quiet, orderly note. This is also a benefit that you have as you send students out into common areas, as you send them to their buses, or as you send them to other classes, is that when we finish the day on that calm, orderly note in whatever class you have, it's going to help assist all of those other environments feel like we're not just, sending kids off into chaos. If everybody can do a quick double check on your mute button, and Nick, if you can help me out with that, that'd be great. All right. So with that vision, as you're making tweaks and adjustments, again, be thinking not just what do I want as sort of the operational bare minimum from my students and what procedures need to be put in place. So certainly, you can be thinking about if students are struggling with independent work, how am I going to help them procedurally with, the expectations for movement, for talking in the classroom, for getting help. But it's also thinking about how are we going to motivate them? How are we going to get them excited? So independent seat work, I might be doing some thinking about, do students need something external? Do they need additional praise and acknowledgement during that time period? Do I want to be thinking about the types of independent activities that they're doing and trying to find ways to make them novel and exciting at different times? So again, our vision for the shore is how do we prevent as much misbehavior as possible, but also what is that ultimate vision for success and how can we pull that into our management plan? Now, let me give you just one more example of this before we spend our last 15 minutes talking about launching the management plan. I saw a lot of your comments at the beginning of our session together were really about the positive nature of the environment. You want lots of positive interactions with kids. You want kids feeling like they're cared for and supported, and those different types of sort of just the feel of the classroom. And the number one thing that dictates the feel of the classroom is the adult or the adults that are in that classroom. So when we as adults are looking stressed, frazzled, frustrated, that starts to spill over to our students. Now, of course, we all feel stressed, frazzled, frustrated at different points of year, but that's when we need to initiate. Item 10 on the classroom management plan is all about the positive acknowledgement and encouragement procedures that you're going to use. And one of the things that I've actually been asking my CHAMPS participants when I do the classroom management training is I actually ask them to list dates and then put calendar reminders in their calendar for at least like once every 6 weeks, if not more often. Remind yourself to sit down and think about what encouragement and positive interaction procedures you're going to use. And part of the prompt here is thinking about what are the times when you as a teacher are the most tired? What are the times when it's the hardest for you to remember to be positive with your students? For me, it was always kind of the dark days of February. It gets dark at like 4 o'clock here. And so trying to remember to be positive during that time period. For some people, it's during state testing time. I think that for a lot of us, the first month of school is the easiest time that we're positive with kids because we focus on it, right? We know that building that classroom climate and culture is incredibly important. So really, like starting to think about your first reminder should be in week about 3.5 of school, right? At the point where the honeymoon is just starting to be over, give yourself that prompt or reminder to go back to thinking about what are the investments that I've been building in building relationships with my kids and giving positive descriptive behavioral feedback. Patricia, you are doing a fantastic job giving me your full attention. Christine, I really appreciate the way that you have been taking notes all throughout this, right? And using that positive feedback to try and help keep that behavioral momentum going, even at times of year when students may be struggling or we as adults may be struggling. All right. Now, this next content that we have, I actually built in quite a bit into your written handout, knowing that we might not have a ton of time towards the end of our time period. So I'm just going to breeze through some of this with critical considerations. But again, feel free to get in touch, or there's lots more information in your CHAMPS resource. So the first section in your handout after essential management considerations is preparing to launch. So this is still the thinking about what are we doing before students even enter the room, or if they have entered already, like kind of backtracking and thinking, are there any additional things that I need to prepare for? So completing your classroom management plan, actually having it down in writing. We do always recommend that if you're in a school that is using CHAMPS or DSC, that those classroom management plans are being held by both the teacher and the administrator. For secondary schools, if you have a syllabus, please have a syllabus if you are a secondary teacher, that you're actually aligning some of your classroom management components with your syllabus. So critical, expectations that you have, you might include your guidelines for success and your rules. I know some teachers will even include in their syllabus, like their main activity structures, teacher-directed instruction, cooperative seat work, independent work, maybe tests. And they'll include their expectations for those things so that kids and families can be seeing those as they're coming home. Any expectations that you have regarding grading and things like that. I say, please have a syllabus because I was kind of shocked because my son was in middle school. My daughter is now entering middle school. And there were a number of classes where we never received a syllabus, and even trying to figure out, what happens if a student is absent and what are the expectations for how they're going to get caught up on that work or what communication needs to happen. It was just a lot more complicated without that information going to the students as well as the families. We're always going to recommend make a big sign that is on your door, or even like if you're able to put it up high enough that it's, kind of hanging out into the hallway. I remember as a middle school and high school kid who had a fair amount of anxiety, especially on first day of school, that my fear about getting lost in the building. And so having really easy signage. I went into a elementary school that was very, very large, and they had color coded all of their hallways. But what they they also did is they included big pictures of each teacher with their big name, and they hung it on a flag over their doors so that from anywhere in the hallway, if I know that I'm supposed to be in the orange hallway, I can just look down and I can easily find which room I'm supposed to go to. So thinking about if there's structures you can put in place to just reduce some of that anxiety on that first day. Assignment considerations. I am always going to recommend that you start with a structured seating chart, and you can always get student input later on who they would like to sit next to next. But again, as a student who struggled with anxiety and knowing a lot of the students that I worked with that needed more structure and support, kids who like pick your seat, pick your group types of activities tend to be our kids who are already doing well in school. They do well academically. They've got a social network. They're excited to be at school. Our kids who struggle more, so our more reserved students, our students who struggle with anxiety, our kids who struggle with behavior, are newcomers to the school. A seating assignment actually creates a sense of protection and safety, that I don't have to fend for my place within that environment. And so especially on that first couple of days, make sure that you're bringing that in. If you would like to move to a less structured seating arrangement, but still having the benefits of having, being able to orchestrate who's seated next to each other at some level, ask students to indicate who are some people that they would like to work with. And then you can try and accommodate as many requests as possible whenever you do those seating charts. Opening activity. We recommend that the opening activity when students are coming in on that first day into your room is something that is purposeful. So it actually has a reason behind it, whether it's you getting to know something about the students or them doing something that is going to be based in the content that you're going to be doing, that it's independent. So you want it to be as simple as it needs to be so that students can actually access that content. And a big part of this is setting the tone that as soon as you enter my classroom, we're going to be doing important things, right? So rather than it being sort of fluff activities or kids just wandering around, that's also true for start of class activities, even once the school year starts, is that we always want to make sure as soon as students enter into the room, that we're getting them into some sort of purposeful type of activity that allows us to get settled pretty quickly. You're going to obviously have a modified schedule on the first day of school. It's going to be a lot of logistics. The most important logistics should always happen in about the first 10 minutes of whatever class period you have with them. Avoid doing like a whole bunch of name game types of activities. We do want to start even from day one of school, getting them into some purposeful content that's going to be important to them. And certainly having some fun and engaging, get to know you types of activities can be good. But I think we can also all remember different times when we went to like
Hey everybody, this is Nick. I have a feeling that Jess just lost connection, so I'm gonna go down and see what happened, and let's just hang tight. I'm sure she'll be back on in a sec. Wow. So over here.
Nick.
Yeah. What's that?
Hi, everybody. I'm in a different location. Something just happened and we don't know what. So, welcome to my office. Nothing like just rolling with it. Okay. So, we were talking about the preparation to launch and the idea of having sort of meaningful, purposeful opening activities, modified schedule for that first day. You're going to see in your handout that there were some parental considerations, and this comes actually from some of my experiences that I've seen with especially younger students. You oftentimes are going to have really well-meaning parents who want to come into the classroom and meet the teacher and kind of spend a little bit of time settling their student in. Krista, I'm seeing a head nod there. Maybe you've had that experience before. So it's really thinking about how are you pre-planning for and even helping your parents understand what that needs to look like on that first day is just that real quick handoff and transition, that your job is to be with the students and to be getting things going. And as well-meaning as parents are, sometimes they can suck up all of that attention and energy. So again, a lot of your classroom management plan is just predicting for predictable concerns and trying to say, how am I going to be intentional in planning for those things that I know may be a concern? Now, first day of school, we always want to make sure that we're greeting all of our students at the door, starting to, put a little bit of that investment in an individual, bit of attention with them. And it is part of the reason that we recommend having that purposeful, independent activity so that you don't have to be doing as much like really circulating and roaming through the classroom. You can be greeting students at the door. You're going to make sure that you've got the schedule for the day posted, that you've got any of that logistics information up there. And right from that start of day one, we want to start using what we call the teach, observe, feedback cycle, which is basically that if I'm about to have students do a little like maybe small cooperative group activity where it's a bit of them getting to know each other, I want to start teaching my cooperative group expectations right up front. So I'm going to teach those expectations. I'm going to have some active participation happening so that, they're giving me a sense that they're understanding what the expectations are. I might even have a couple of quick little false like turn and talk types of activities so that they can practice those. I'll make sure that I teach them whatever my attention signal is before we head into that activity. So I teach the expectations. Then they're actually going to do the activity and I'm going to observe them. I'm going to be giving positive and corrective feedback as that activity is happening. So making sure that if I do see students that are following the expectations that we just laid out, I'm using a lot of specific verbal feedback to ensure that they're sort of hearing and getting that reinforced. Thank you, this group, for really staying focused, and you're using a level 2 voice level, which we just talked about, right? So the concept there is there's an idea of notice and narrate. When we're observing our students in the activity, I'm noticing what they're doing well, and I'm actually verbally narrating it to them or writing down some positive feedback and handing it to them so that it's helping, again, reinforce what those expectations are. So teach, observe, feedback. Feedback is happening at the same time that the observation is happening, but we might also do a summation, right? So we get to the end of that cooperative activity and we're going to go back through the expectations. If you're using CHAMPS as your frame for that, hey, everybody, you did a fantastic job with conversation. Now, I had a few of you who needed help, and remember, this is how we were going to ask for help. So tomorrow we're going to review that expectation, and you're going through like, how did they do on each of those things, giving positive and corrective feedback. Now, if you think about it, at the early stages of learning anything, punishment is not going to be helpful, right? So in our first month of school, and especially in the first week or 2 weeks of school, our corrections really are instructional corrections. They're giving students a little bit of mild corrective feedback. They're helping them kind of understand what the lines are between different things. In terms of correction, I'm also going to know teach, observe, provide feedback. If they struggled with anything, what am I going to do the next time we get to that activity? I'm going to teach it more, right? And we're going to do a little bit more direct practice. I'm going to give a lot more positive and corrective feedback for it until we're able to really solidify those expectations. So from the start of day one, we're really going to be bringing in that teach, observe, provide feedback cycle. And that's basically happening every time we're moving to a new transition or a new activity, is we're doing that teaching practice. Now, once we've gotten, a week under our belt, a week and a half under our belt, we're going to spend far less time teaching expectations if students are learning it. And usually our rule is if they're consistently doing it at least 3 days in a row, then we can start backing off our teaching. And it really may just be more of a, hey, everybody, you did a fantastic job with, cooperative group work yesterday. Our expectations are posted here on the board, so keep up the good work, right? And we can start fading off that active teaching as students show that they master it. But anytime during the year, if we start seeing them slipping on those expectations, we're going to go back into that teach, observe, provide feedback cycle. So using your plan days 2 through 20 just kind of reinforces that idea that that's your time period for solidifying things. And we do always recommend that by about week 4 of school, think about giving your kids a little quiz or some brief individual interviews where you're actually interviewing them or quizzing them on what are the expectations and what are some of the most important behavioral things that we're working on in this class. Okay, so we lost a tiny bit of time due to our technical glitch. I appreciate those of you all who stayed on for a couple of extra minutes. You have your handout or should be able to access that through your email or the website. We do have a number of additional webinars coming up, so we're planning to do a monthly one, and I think the next one is middle of September. It was on my slides, which are on the computer that's no longer working, but it's all posted on the website, and we'll include additional information there. That one is really on coaching and support, so administrative and other coaching support of teachers implementing effective classroom management. We do also have a number of public courses that are virtual courses that are going to be happening this fall. There's going to be one on coaching, one on champs and discipline in the secondary classroom. So if there are teachers that you want to have trained in this approach, they're going to be evening courses for that one. And then there's also going to be one on attendance. And we will have a tier 2, tier 3 intervention session starting in January, I believe. So thank you all so much. You should be getting some additional information to follow up with this. And I'm going to open up the chat box here and see if we have any other questions. Please feel free to unmute yourself. I'm going to stop the recording here, but look forward to hopefully seeing y'all in the future if this was beneficial.